Silence is never just silence. It is a frequency, a vibration, a communication that moves beneath the surface of spoken language. When someone grows quiet, especially someone who once engaged, shared, laughed, or leaned in toward you, that quietness carries a message. It is not an empty space. It is an unspoken truth. People rarely retreat without reason. Human beings are expressive creatures by nature through words, gestures, energy, and action. And when that expression suddenly collapses into stillness, the stillness becomes its own kind of statement. You can feel it in the atmosphere, in the space between interactions, in the subtle change of rhythm. Silence is never neutral. It is a signal waiting to be interpreted by the one who is brave enough to acknowledge it. When a person becomes quiet, especially in a relationship or connection, they have already begun their internal evaluation. They have looked at the situation, measured it against their values, their emotions, their expectations, and their personal boundaries, and they've reached a conclusion they may not yet be willing to voice. Silence becomes the container in which that conclusion sits. It is the gap between their realization and your awareness. And often we feel that quietness before we understand it. We feel it as distance, as a shift, as a cooling, as a withdrawal of energy. We feel that something is already decided, even if no one has said a word. This is because silence is not passive, it is intentional. A person's quietness can be a way of protecting themselves or a way of stepping back from what no longer aligns with them. It may be their way of avoiding confrontation or a way of respecting their own emotional space. It may be their way of testing whether you will notice the shift or continue as though everything is the same. Silence often holds more truth than an entire conversation because it is not filtered, not edited, not softened. It is raw and unpolished. In silence, a person reveals what they no longer wish to invest in, what they are unsure about, or what they have already chosen to release. When someone withdraws into quietness, they have made an inner decision about you, about the situation, about the future of the connection. And while they may not express that decision in words, it shows up in their absence. It shows up in the way their attention fades, how their priorities shift, how their consistency dissolves. Silence becomes the final expression of a decision that has already taken root within them. And the moment that silence surfaces, it's not the beginning of their decision-making, it's the reflection of a decision already made. Many people try to fill the silence with excuses. They say, maybe he's just busy, maybe he forgot, maybe he's overwhelmed, or maybe I'm overthinking. But silence rarely lies. People who value connection, communication, and presence rarely allow quietness to linger unless they are moving away mentally, emotionally, or spiritually. Silence is a symptom of a choice, and ignoring that choice doesn't change the truth of it. The discomfort you feel around someone's quietness is your intuition, recognizing that a decision has already been settled, whether or not it has been expressed aloud. When you begin to understand silence as a form of communication, you stop chasing explanations. You stop trying to decode mixed signals. You stop attempting to revive what someone has already stepped away from internally. You begin to read energy instead of words. You begin to recognize that when someone withdraws, they are revealing a truth you are meant to acknowledge, not negotiate with. Silence is a direct message that bypasses the tongue and speaks straight from the heart. It is important to understand that silence does not reveal the details of the decision, only the fact that a decision exists. The specifics may vary. Perhaps he is no longer invested. Perhaps he is distancing for his own growth. Perhaps he no longer sees alignment, or perhaps he has chosen a different direction. But the existence of silence itself is the indicator. It is the marker that something has shifted. It is the sign that the dynamic is no longer the same. Quietness carries the weight of closure before closure is spoken. To pay attention to someone's silence is to honor your own awareness. It is to recognize that communication is not always verbal. It is to understand that the absence of engagement is in itself an answer. And when someone becomes quiet, they have said far more than words could ever express. A person's energy is the purest form of truth you will ever encounter. Long before a word leaves someone's lips, long before they form a sentence to explain themselves, you can feel who they are, what they're choosing, what they value, where their heart is moving, and what their intentions are shaping into. People can disguise their words, but they cannot disguise the vibration they carry. Energy is the language beneath the language, the current that flows under every gesture, every response, every moment of presence or absence. When someone grows quiet, their energy becomes even more revealing, because without words, you are left with the raw signal of who they are and how they feel. You can sense when someone is pulling back. You can feel when their spirit is no longer leaning toward you. Their tone changes, not just in sound, but in essence. Their eyes don't hold you the same way. Their responses lose warmth, depth, or intention. They become present in body, but distant in connection. And before they ever say, I'm deciding something about us, their energy already announced it. Humans are energetic beings. We broadcast what we think, believe, fear, and desire through the way we show up. Even silence carries a vibration. Sometimes it's heavy, sometimes it's cold, sometimes it's indifferent, and sometimes it's simply gone. But whatever form it takes, it always tells the truth. When someone withdraws, they may not verbalize the decision forming inside them, but their energy begins moving in the direction of that decision. You can feel when someone is detaching emotionally, even if they continue to act polite or neutral. You can feel when someone is evaluating you, not with malice, but with clarity, measuring compatibility, trust, effort, alignment. Their quietness becomes a field of energy that communicates everything they aren't yet ready to say. Their hesitation has a frequency. Their doubt has a frequency. Their loss of interest has a frequency. And once you tune into that, you stop needing verbal confirmation to understand what's happening. People often pretend they didn't feel the energetic shift because facing it requires courage. It requires acknowledging that something has changed, that someone is pulling away, that a decision is forming without your input. Instead, many choose to rationalize the shift. They say, maybe I'm imagining it, or maybe it's just stress, or maybe they didn't mean it. But energy is rarely misunderstood. We feel what is real. We sense intention even when intention is unspoken. When someone's energy shrinks away from you, the connection changes shape before your eyes. And pretending not to notice only delays the clarity. Energy never lies because it is not filtered through fear, social expectations, or politeness. Words can be crafted to ease tension, to avoid conflict, or to keep the peace. But energy is unedited. It shows exactly where someone stands, even if they themselves are trying to hide it. You might hear someone say they care, but their energy feels empty. You might hear someone say they're busy, but their energy feels dismissive. You might hear someone say everything is fine, but the energy between you feels like a door slowly closing. That feeling is the truth. That feeling is the message. That feeling is the decision revealing itself before it's spoken. When you begin paying attention to energy, you stop clinging to mixed signals because you realize the signals were not mixed, you were just listening to the wrong channel. The energy tells the story clearly. Their behavior, their consistency, their level of presence, their tone, their pauses, their silence, these things carry the weight of their true thoughts. And when someone grows quiet, their energy amplifies. It becomes easier to detect what they feel. It becomes easier to sense the direction they're moving. Their silence creates a space where their energy becomes louder than words ever could. A person's energy is a reflection of their internal decision-making. People may not yet know how to articulate what they've concluded, but their energy will begin aligning with that conclusion. If someone has decided to pull away, their energy retracts. If someone has decided you no longer fit their vision, their energy grows sparse and scattered. If someone has decided the connection isn't for them, their energy stops reaching for you. And you can feel this shift, not because you're overthinking, but because your intuition recognizes truth long before your mind wants to accept it. When you allow yourself to trust what you feel, you no longer need to force clarity from others. You no longer need to chase answers or beg for explanations. You understand that energy is communication and silence is confirmation. The moment someone's energy changes, the connection changes with it. And the sooner you acknowledge that, the clearer your path becomes. Lack of action is never a coincidence. It is never an accident. It is never just someone being forgetful or distracted. It is a deliberate choice, even if the person making that choice doesn't say it out loud. People reveal their priorities through the things they do consistently and through the things they stop doing. When someone's effort fades, when their calls slow down, when their presence becomes irregular, when their investment loses momentum, that absence is not empty, it is a message. The truth is that inaction holds just as much meaning as action, often more. It tells you where someone stands, what they value, what they've accepted, and what they've walked away from internally. We often try to convince ourselves that a lack of action shouldn't be taken personally. We tell ourselves they're busy, distracted, tired, overwhelmed. And while life can indeed create moments of temporary distance, true connection always finds its way back with intention. A person who cares, engages. A person who values you, shows it. A person who sees you as part of their life makes room for you. That is the nature of human commitment. So when someone stops taking action or their efforts slowly deteriorate, it's not just a gap, it's a decision unfolding. People don't abandon actions that matter to them. They only neglect what no longer aligns with their inner direction. Inaction reveals far more than excuses ever will. When someone stops initiating conversations, stops showing enthusiasm, stops asking about your life, stops checking on your well-being, it is not because they forgot. It is because something inside them has shifted, and their behavior reflects that shift. The human spirit always moves toward what it wants and withdraws from what it has decided against. And the moment actions decline, the deeper truth surfaces. The person may not say, "This isn't working," or "I'm choosing a different path," but their lack of effort paints that picture more clearly than any explanation could. The challenge lies in how we interpret this absence of effort. Many people cling to the fragments of what used to be, holding on to memories of the past instead of acknowledging the reality of the present. They wait. They make excuses. They hold on to hope. They tell themselves the silence is temporary. But the truth is that lack of action speaks long before words ever do. When someone stops showing up, stops investing, stops prioritizing, that disappearance of effort is already the conclusion. It is the evidence of a decision forming beneath the surface. When a person's actions begin to decline, they are telling you something about how they see the connection. When the initiative shifts entirely onto your shoulders, that imbalance exposes a decision they may not be brave enough to voice. When they no longer try to understand you, no longer try to support you, no longer try to create moments of connection, the absence of those efforts becomes the story. Action is always intentional, and so is inaction. A person's willingness to make room for you is a reflection of their inner conviction, and when that willingness fades, the truth becomes unmistakable. Lack of action also reveals how a person values your presence in their life. If someone truly sees your worth, they will demonstrate it through consistent behavior. They will not let silence stretch too long. They will not allow distance to become the new normal. They will not watch the connection weaken without stepping in. People who care take action because caring demands movement. It demands involvement. It demands responsibility. So when the action stops, it's not because they don't know what to do. It's because they no longer feel compelled to do it. The hardest part is accepting that inaction is an answer. Many hope for a conversation, a clear explanation, a closure. But most decisions happen quietly. Most shifts in heart occur before they are ever expressed. And by the time you notice the lack of action, that person has already made peace with the direction they're choosing. Their silence is not confusion. Their distance is not uncertainty. Their absence is not accident. It is a choice. When you understand that lack of action is itself a form of communication, you begin to see relationships, friendships, and connections with new clarity. You stop relying on promises and start observing patterns. You stop listening to what people say and start noticing what they do regularly. You stop chasing after someone whose actions reveal disinterest. You start valuing your time, your energy, your heart enough to recognize when someone has already decided something about you. A person's actions are a mirror of their priorities, and their inaction is a mirror of their decisions. When someone stops contributing, stops reaching out, stops making an effort, you are witnessing the truth, unfiltered, unspoken, undeniable. And the sooner you acknowledge that truth, the sooner you free yourself from waiting for something that has already been decided in silence. Value yourself enough to interpret reality, not potential, because potential is a seductive illusion. It's the picture we paint of what someone times could times be, how things times might times turn out, or what the connection times should times look like if the other person finally rose to the level you hoped for. Potential keeps you holding on to possibilities instead of paying attention to the truth unfolding right in front of you. It convinces you to overlook the silence, dismiss the distance, and excuse the inconsistency. But reality is where the truth lives. Reality is revealed through patterns, choices, behavior, and presence. When someone's actions and silence are showing you who they are, valuing yourself means choosing to see that truth rather than clinging to the fantasy of what you wish they would become. When you value yourself, you stop negotiating with behavior that contradicts the words you want to hear. You stop tolerating silence that becomes louder than promises. You stop giving unlimited chances to someone who shows you limited effort. Valuing yourself means acknowledging that your emotional well-being, your peace, and your sense of worth are not dependent on someone else's potential growth. They are rooted in your recognition of what times is asterisk, and what is always more reliable than what might be. When someone pulls away, when they become quiet, when they stop investing, that is the truth. That is the reality. And valuing yourself means honoring that reality, even when it's uncomfortable to face. Potential keeps you stuck in cycles where you settle for almost enough. You see glimpses of what the connection could be, and you cling to those glimpses, hoping they will eventually solidify. But glimpses are not consistency. Flashes of interest are not commitment. Temporary effort is not transformation. People often give just enough to keep you hopeful, but not enough to build anything meaningful. When you elevate your self-worth, you recognize that hope is not a strategy, waiting is not a plan, and potential is not a foundation for a relationship or connection. Reality is the only ground strong enough to stand on. When someone's silence begins to replace their presence, valuing yourself means resisting the urge to make excuses. It means refusing to rewrite their behavior into something softer than it is. It means seeing the withdrawal for what it represents. Potential tries to convince you that they might come back, they might change, they might explain, they might still choose you. But reality says the distance is already forming, and distance does not appear without cause. Valuing yourself means listening to that distance instead of fighting against it. There is a subtle strength that rises within you when you start interpreting people through their reality. You no longer chase. You no longer beg for clarity. You no longer carry the emotional weight of trying to fix what someone else has decided to loosen. Instead, you step back, you observe, you honor what you feel. You choose yourself without collapsing your worth around someone else's choices. When you value yourself, you understand that emotional reciprocity is not optional, it is the minimum. And silence from someone who once invested is not reciprocity, it is revelation. Interpreting reality also means understanding your own patterns. Many people fall in love with potential because it feels safe to imagine what things could become. It feels comforting to hold on to the dream. But when you choose reality, you learn to let go of your own illusions. You learn to accept that wishing someone was different does not make them different. Hoping someone will change does not create change. Your desire cannot manufacture their decision. And their silence, distance, or lack of effort cannot be redefined just because you want the story to turn out differently. When you value yourself, you set emotional boundaries rooted in truth. You stop allowing inconsistency to be enough. You stop accepting silence as something you must tolerate. You stop shrinking your needs just to keep someone comfortable. Instead, you step into the understanding that you deserve presence, consistency, clarity, effort, and alignment. You deserve relationships that feel mutual, connections that feel intentional, and communication that feels honest. And if someone is unable or unwilling to provide that, their potential becomes irrelevant. Reality becomes the only measure that matters. The moment you choose to interpret reality over potential, everything shifts. Your spirit feels lighter, your decisions become clearer. You stop attaching your worth to how someone else behaves. You stop waiting for someone to give you what they've already shown they have no intention of giving. You begin to move in the direction of people who choose you willingly, speak to you openly, and value you fully. You understand that the quietness of another person is not a reflection of your inadequacy, but a reflection of their decision, and you do not argue with someone's decision when you value yourself. Interpreting reality is an act of freedom. It breaks the chains of waiting, hoping, and wondering. It anchors you in the truth of the moment, not the fantasy of the future. And when you stand in that truth, potential loses its power over you. Silence becomes clarity. Distance becomes direction. And your self-worth becomes the compass that guides you forward, not backward. Silence has a way of creating space, space you did not ask for, space you did not expect, space that often feels uncomfortable at first. But within that space lies an invitation to grow, to reflect, and to return to yourself. When someone pulls back, when their voice fades, when their presence becomes faint, the silence they leave behind can feel like a void. Yet that void is exactly where your strength begins to take shape. Silence from another person forces you to confront your own value, your own patterns, and your own emotional resilience. It becomes a mirror reflecting not just what is happening around you, but what is happening within you. When someone withdraws, it removes the noise that once distracted you. It removes the emotional clutter that kept you preoccupied with their behavior, their intentions, their choices. Suddenly, you're left with yourself, your voice, your needs, your desires, your standards, and often this is the moment when you begin to realize how much of yourself you may have compromised or ignored. Silence becomes the atmosphere in which you finally hear the parts of you that were drowned out by the connection. It becomes the place where your intuition speaks without interruption, where your clarity rises without resistance, and where your self-awareness deepens without apology. In that quiet space, you start to examine the connection not from a place of wishful thinking, but from a place of truth. You begin to ask questions you avoided before. Why was I holding on so tightly? Why did I overlook what I felt? Why did I accept less than what I deserved? Why did I hope someone would change instead of choosing someone already aligned with me? These questions don't appear out of nowhere. They rise from the silence that enters your life when someone steps away. Their absence creates the conditions for your honesty to surface. Silence is also a teacher. It teaches you the value of emotional independence, the importance of self-trust, and the power of not depending on someone else's presence to define your worth. When someone goes quiet, it pushes you to build your own foundation. It forces you to become your own source of validation, your own source of strength, your own source of stability. You begin to realize you can stand on your own, think for yourself, and choose yourself even when someone else chooses distance. That realization is transformative. It shifts the way you see relationships, the way you make decisions, and the way you protect your peace. Growth often begins in the moments when you feel abandoned or overlooked. Those are the moments that sharpen your awareness and heighten your understanding of what you truly deserve. Silence gives you the time to evaluate what you were settling for, what you were tolerating, what you were ignoring, and what you were giving away without receiving anything meaningful in return. Without the distraction of constant communication or interaction, you gain a clearer view of the connection and your role in it. You begin to see the difference between companionship and dependency, between love and attachment, between effort and expectation. In this stillness, your standards begin to rise. You start to identify the red flags you previously dismissed. You notice the patterns that weren't serving you. You recognize the emotional imbalances that felt normal but were draining you. Silence takes away the illusion that everything was fine and replaces it with the truth that something was misaligned. And once you see that truth, you cannot unsee it. You become more selective with your energy, more protective of your time, more intentional with your boundaries. You begin to build a level of inner strength that no longer bends under the pressure of someone else's inconsistency. Silence also allows healing to begin. When you are constantly interacting with someone, even if the connection is fading, your emotions remain entangled. But when that interaction stops, when the communication dissolves, when the noise settles, your heart finally has the space to breathe. It has the space to release what was weighing it down, the space to detach from what was hurting it, the space to regain its rhythm. Healing rarely happens in loud environments. It happens in quiet moments, in reflection, in stillness. The quietness that feels like loss in the beginning becomes the soil where your recovery grows. And as you grow, silence starts to feel different. What once felt like rejection begins to feel like redirection. What once felt like emptiness begins to feel like clarity. What once felt like abandonment begins to feel like liberation. You begin to understand that the silence someone left you with is not punishment, it is opportunity. It is a doorway into a stronger version of yourself, a version who no longer waits for someone else to decide your worth, a version who refuses to shrink just to keep someone close, a version who sees silence not as an ending, but as the beginning of a deeper connection with yourself. The quietness someone else creates often becomes the turning point in your life. The moment you learn to rise without being prompted, the moment you learn to love yourself without permission, the moment you learn that losing someone's presence is not nearly as painful as losing your own. Your response to silence is one of the most defining choices you will ever make, because it determines not just how you view the situation, but how you view yourself. You cannot control another person's silence, distance, or decision, but you can control the meaning you assign to it and the direction you take once you receive it. People will come into your life with their own intentions, their own patterns, their own uncertainties, and sometimes their own unresolved wounds. Their quietness is about them, not you. But your reaction to that quietness is entirely about your self-worth, your emotional maturity, and your ability to rise above what tries to weigh you down. How you respond becomes the turning point that shapes your growth, your standards, and your emotional future. When someone stops communicating, stops showing effort, or stops investing, you stand at a crossroads. One path leads you into self-doubt, overthinking, and chasing answers you may never receive. The other path leads you into clarity, self-respect, and inner strength. The choice you make in that moment reveals your inner narrative. Do you shrink because someone withdrew, or do you stand taller because you recognize your value? Do you beg for closure? Or do you provide closure for yourself by acknowledging truth? Do you allow their silence to define you? Or do you use that silence as fuel to define yourself? Your response to silence determines whether you stay stuck in someone else's indecision or return to the power of your own alignment. You can spend weeks, months, even years trying to decode their behavior, trying to understand what went wrong, trying to prove your worth to someone who already made a quiet decision. But that only delays the growth waiting for you on the other side. When you choose to respond with self-respect instead of desperation, you shift the dynamic entirely. You reclaim your emotional power. You send a message to yourself that your worth is not contingent on someone else's presence. Choosing a strong response doesn't always feel good at first. It may feel lonely. It may feel confusing. It may even feel like you're walking away from something you still care about. But responding from a place of self-worth means you refuse to lower yourself to meet someone else's lack of effort. It means you stop performing emotional labor that isn't reciprocated. It means you stop chasing explanations from someone who made a decision but didn't have the courage to voice it. It means you protect your spirit instead of waiting for someone to come back and validate what you already know deep down. Your response to silence also shapes the kind of people you attract in the future. When you tolerate emotional inconsistency, you create space for more inconsistency. When you allow someone's silence to linger without addressing it, you teach others that your needs can be dismissed. But when you respond with boundaries, clarity, and strength, you send a very different message. You communicate that your emotional energy is valuable. You show that you will not be an option, an afterthought, or a placeholder. You position yourself to attract relationships rooted in mutual respect, presence, and reciprocity. The way you respond also becomes part of your emotional identity. If you choose to internalize someone's silence as rejection, you weaken your self-image. You start seeing yourself through the lens of their absence. But if you choose to interpret silence as direction, a sign that the connection no longer aligns, you strengthen your identity. You start trusting yourself more deeply. You start making decisions based on your value rather than your fear. You start honoring your intuition instead of suppressing it. When someone goes quiet, your response can either open a wound or open a door. It can either break you or build you. It can either make you feel inadequate or make you feel awakened. The silence itself is not the defining factor. It is your interpretation, your reaction, your choice that determines the outcome. You can choose to see silence as an ending, or you can choose to see it as an invitation to elevate. You can choose to wait for someone's return, or you can choose to move forward with dignity. You can choose to absorb their distance as a reflection of your worth, or you can choose to understand that their decision was never a measurement of your value. Life will always present you with moments where someone's silence forces you to choose yourself. And each time you choose yourself, you rewrite your future. You become less tolerant of emotional uncertainty. You become more attuned to your intuition. You become more grounded in your truth. You become more aligned with people who show up fully, not partially. Your response becomes the filter that separates what drains you from what grows you. When someone's silence leaves you in the dark, you have the power to turn on the light within yourself. Your choice in that moment determines whether you stay lost or whether you rise into a clearer, stronger, more self-assured version of who you're meant to be.